I'm still absolutely overwhelmed by fear and panic, and I ask you, before you watch this video, to keep that in mind. I'll explain why later. However, not only was I threatened, but my family was threatened at the same time as well. That's why this video is coming out later, and now we'll get into the title of the video. Today, once again, everything is at stake in political Berlin. But how we've been lied to again in the past few days and how much campaigning has actually been done for the AfD, you'll find out in this video. Well, just listen to the whole thing for yourself.
The numbers speak for themselves. The numbers have dropped so clearly and significantly that we can say we've solved a large part of the problem now.
What he presents as a solution to the problem, well, unfortunately, we see things very differently here in Germany, and that's something I had to realize myself this morning. Last night, I had to painfully realize that the threat against our culture, against our population, is simply not decreasing. And instead of saying, leave me a like and subscribe, today I want to leave you with one thing. If you are a victim, yes, or if something bad has happened to you. Whether it's because of politics, violent activities, or something similar, you can now contact 116006. These people are there from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And if, for example, you have no way to turn to anyone, I'll talk a bit more about that later.
Does he mean that 35% of suspects are foreign nationals? Does he mean the 8.5% increase in sexual offenses where migrants are also massively overrepresented? Does he mean the 6.5% increase in deadly violence where migrants are also massively overrepresented? Does he mean that 1 in 4 people in Germany now has an immigrant background? Does he mean that Germany has as few births as it last did in 1946? Nope, he means 51% fewer asylum applications than the previous year. Yes, and you have to say that it's still 170,000 asylum applications and that they've only gone down because there's no longer a war in Syria.
Now I'd like to tell you a purely fictional story. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with me, at least not until the investigation is completed. Supposedly I have 2, 3, maybe 4 children. One of them would provoke a migrant who would then seek out another one of my children and physically assault them. I, who maybe make political videos, think to myself, okay, listen, I know 1 or 2 members of parliament, so I make a call. Yeah, maybe you could check out this channel, and then they give me a phone number for the Ministry of the Interior, which of course I call at exactly 7 o'clock because now I have the private number for all of this. Yeah, that's how it goes. And this person then tells me on the phone, purely hypothetically, yeah, please call the school right away and say yeah, as long as it doesn't happen again. That you won't press charges to de-escalate the situation. And I'm thinking to myself, hello, where am I actually living? Of course, this is a purely fictional story because I'm not allowed to tell you until the whole thing is over. This is Germany today. This is Germany when, for example, kids think it's okay to threaten parents and others. And there are stories like that. I'll talk a bit more about that later.
It's a good thing that Wolfgang Bursche, the spokesperson for the children's and youth organization Arche, said this here. The pressure that political Islam exerts on classmates through children of Muslim faith in our schools is growing stronger and stronger. Little hardcore Muslims, mini-Islamists are growing up there. Our staff at the Arche facilities are telling me more and more often that students who do not adhere to the strict lifestyles of political Islam are being excluded, pressured, intimidated, and even pushed to convert to Islam.
For example, if students don't want that and say things like, you might do that in your country but not here, they're told that could be considered racism. So, if you reject Islam, which by the way is absolutely legitimate here in Germany, let me give you an example. We have Muslims living in our neighborhood, and when they come over to play and we only have pork on the grill, they can't eat with us. If we have beef and pork, if we only have beef and maybe some chicken, then they're welcome to eat with us. But if, for example, just hypothetically, my children were to reject the whole thing and say, hey, we have a problem with you bringing this into our family, but if you really want to do that, you have to go back to your country. You can do that there, of course. Then I'm told, hey, that could be understood as racism. you should slow down now. And I asked myself, hey, can this really be true? Can all of this still be true, the way things are developing here in Germany right now? If this hadn't happened to me personally, purely hypothetical of course, then I would probably think a bit differently about this whole thing. But now I'm absolutely shaking, especially when kids like that say, yeah, where does the father live? Let's go get the father. And that happens out on a public street. And since the whole thing might have happened in a facility and at the same time an employee there wanted to call an ambulance, it escalated that badly. However, the police once again were not called and you run into a wall of silence here in Germany. And that's something I just wanted to clarify with this video. As I said, that's why I'm not asking for a like or a subscription. This is really just about the facts of what happened to me and why I was scared this morning. And I'm shaking because the situation hasn't been resolved. And because the Ministry of the Interior says, yes, but maybe someone acted a bit racist because they reject Islam. Although the people who are Muslims also reject Christianity, otherwise they would be doing different things.
Things aren't any better in multicultural Cologne either. Today you could read this from a school principal in the Express. 95% of our children have an immigrant background and their language skills are sometimes limited. Yes, and their language skills are so limited that some of them don't even know what the word apple means. When I try to teach the children the letters A as in apple and B as in tree using the initial sound chart, it doesn't work for many of them. They simply don't know what an apple is because they don't know the word. Yes, and if this continues, within 10 years at the latest, we'll really have ended up in idiocracy. In any case, in some form of multicultural caliphate.
And now I want to go back to this fictional story, the one I've been through over the last 10 hours or so, purely as a fictional example. And why this morning I'm somehow completely out of sorts and I'm not talking about Berlin politics anymore, but about migration instead. A video. Rein theoretically, I reached out to someone who is connected to the family, who then called them to clarify and de-escalate the situation. Because he already told me on the phone, more or less, even if you spell it out for them, these people don't understand that and feel their honor is insulted, and that's why it escalates. So if you tell these people, yeah, you have to go back to your own country, they understand that and react aggressively. But if you then want to talk to them to de-escalate the situation, they don't understand it anymore. Again, this is a fictional story taken out of context. That's extremely important. I just want to point out that if this policy doesn't change course as quickly as possible, then we have a problem. Friedrich Merz can't just stand there and say, yes, we've solved the problems, when in the end things are getting worse for everyone day by day. And let's be honest, by now everyone knows someone who has been attacked. Or everyone knows someone who has died, or everyone knows someone from a village where someone has died. And many people know all three things at the same time. And what the politicians are doing is building walls, building a huge wall around it so that you out there can't get any help at all. Except, of course, for the phone number I gave you right at the beginning, if you don't have a phone number from the Ministry of the Interior. And now I can tell you one thing.
Wenn du zum Beispiel mit
If you have to deal with or are involved with institutions like youth centers, etc., then the word Ministry of the Interior is worth its weight in gold. However, there are only very, very few people who can turn to them. But for example, after watching this video, you can simply write an email to the Ministry of the Interior. Why? Let's listen to another short clip and I'll tell you in a moment why this will significantly advance your interests.
The government has migration so well under control that even well-integrated migrants are now afraid of the consequences of uncontrolled mass migration.
It also makes me afraid when I see what's happening in Germany, where I used to feel safe, where I felt comfortable under liberal values, where I could say who I am. As a queer woman, as someone who loves freedom, now I feel threatened.
So, and how can you actually exert pressure when something like that happens to you? Because, of course, you don't have the phone number of the Ministry of the Interior or even the private number of someone who works there. However, if you write an email there, and this is very, very important, and describe your case, and of course don't dramatize it, you must not do that. That means everything I told you was actually much less serious. That's why I was very careful about that in this video. And if you now write to the Ministry of the Interior and say that you experienced this or that, then the Ministry of the Interior can no longer say that they didn't have any information about it. For example, if you write to places like schools, youth centers, or I don't know, workplaces, big companies, and so on, and describe the situation, and I really have a lump in my throat here, and explain the situation, it's important that you don't dramatize anything, but stick to the facts. Stick to the facts, or you can downplay the whole thing a little bit. Then they can't claim that they didn't have any information about this situation, and that's what we've already experienced in Neukölln. The moment the politicians have information about it, because you didn't just go to the police, but also turn to the politicians at the same time, now you have much, much better options. And I really wanted to give you some guidance in this video about what you can actually do if you are affected. If you're in the position of saying, hey, I was attacked, if your family is being threatened, what you can do if you say, I reject Islam in any form, I tolerate it, but that other people out there follow Islam. And I want to make it clear again in this video, I don't care if some people are LGBTQ or something like that, or if they are queer people, they just don't need to bring it into my family. If there are people out there who want to live that out, then in my opinion, they can do that, but they should just leave me personally alone about it. And those are our Christian values, and you can expect that from everyone out there. That was really confirmed to me again this morning, that you can have this opinion. And on the topic, if you want to push Islam on me, then you have to go back to your country that tolerates that. It's not racism if you express yourself exactly like that. And racism only starts when, for example, you say that someone has to be sent back, even though their parents, for example, work here and also have a German passport. I just wanted to tell you that again. And for me, it was really, really important. And I want to thank you again here, Miro, for this wonderful video he made yesterday, which I had to bring up here because I saw it yesterday. And yes, I really saw myself in what he said in the video. Unfortunately, it's on X and I can't really provide the source.